my main focus at this point is around Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure-based services.
Cool, thanks, Toby.
No problem. So if we're happy to start, I just wanted to give a brief overview to everybody of what the Windows Virtual Desktop platform really encompasses, because there's some confusion out there as to what technologies need to be used or how it kind of interacts with your existing platform. So Windows Virtual Desktop as a concept is really a management platform. So some of you may be familiar with remote desktop services historically, and all of the different components and services that needs to bring to the table, such as gateways and licensing servers and all of the infrastructure components that you need to have in place in order for users to access a remote desktop environment. Microsoft has in Azure done away with that and now provides Windows Virtual Desktop orchestration services as a service. So the requirement on the customer is simply to have the correct licensing in place, some elements of Azure infrastructure and on-premise infrastructure, and then all of the gateway and broker and licensing components are provided as a service. So just to run you through what this high-level slide is showing, we have on the left a customer environment or an on-premise environment where you have your standard Active Directory. You have organizational units which live inside that Active Directory. So you'd have your user and your computer containers. The Windows Virtual Desktop hosts, which would be hosted in Azure, would be registered within those organizational units, as would the users that use the platform. And then we would use Azure AD Connect to synchronize all of those containers, all of those objects into Azure. Within Azure, you simply need an Azure tenant and an Azure Active Directory. There are some service accounts that get added to the environment, and then within your Azure subscription, you would have a Windows Virtual Desktop tenant or workspace, which is the new terminology, and some resources. So that would be session hosts and the storage associated with the environment and the networking associated with the environment. All of those resources would be accessed through Microsoft's as a service Windows Virtual Desktop platform. If you have on-premise Horizon View or Citrix environments, you can also layer over Citrix and VMware management services. But the Windows Virtual Desktop platform is a purely Microsoft stack. It's all about Microsoft orchestrating the access to your virtual desktop environment. Hopefully that makes sense. So from a use case, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say that the likely use cases, and this really stems from conversations that we've had and where we see the positioning of this in the market based upon the early adoption that has happened. A lot of the recent interest, and it will come as no surprise to anybody given what the world is dealing with at the moment, is around secure remote working and providing a method of connectivity to corporate resources using a cloud-based application delivery model in the form of Windows Virtual Desktop. And when I come onto the licensing, you see why there's a bit of a buzz around that, because a lot of people will already be licensed to use the technology and won't have to add additional Citrix or VMware licenses, so it can be quite cost effective.
Yeah, just to expand on that, if you are a Microsoft house and you have an Azure philosophy or an Azure first strategy, it's almost a no-brainer to move in this direction, because the licensing is almost included with a lot of your M365 products.
And we see that quite a lot, whereby you've got a Citrix or VMware environment that might be 5 or 6 years old. There's a cloud strategy that's been mandated either by the business or by IT, and it's a question of, okay, well, if we need to move an on-prem VDI environment to cloud, how do we do that? And this is one of the methods or one of the use cases for Windows Virtual Desktop. It does give you that ability. One of the other very interesting conversations that we've been having involves Windows Virtual Desktop, but it's about protecting legacy or extending the longevity of legacy. So by that I mean the operating system. If you've got Windows 7 machines and you move those to Windows Virtual Desktop, the security updates will continue. Microsoft will continue to support that Windows 7 environment in Windows Virtual Desktop until January 2023. So if you've got applications that only run on Windows 7 devices or just aren't ready to move away from that yet, then there is an ability to provide some longevity to those users. In addition, with a few ecosystem partners, in particular Droplet Computing, a combination of Droplet, which is containerization technology, it enables you to run legacy applications that perhaps would run on a 2003 or even older server on a modern application server without any degradation of service, which is a really interesting kind of concept, and have a secure method of end-to-end delivery at both client and server side. So a lot of our recent conversations of particularly with established organizations that are carrying applications that might be 15, 20 years old, and the original writer of that software is no longer around, and no one quite knows how it works, but it just seems to kind of chug away, and don't yet have a change program in place to move away from it. There's a use case there around that. And finally, business continuity. Because of the fact that a lot of people are licensed for it already, and the fact that the other costs associated with this are Azure consumption costs around compute, storage, and networking, some of which can be turned off if it's not in use. It can be an effective way of scaling up remote working in a continuity scenario. So yes, it's another
acquisition's also worth mentioning there, Mike, as well.
True.
For businesses that are acquisitive, where you need to onboard new staff quickly, and you can't change their physical infrastructure, you can provide them with a corporate desktop almost instantly via this method, as long as they've got internet connection, which is quite powerful.
Yeah, and because it's a secure method of delivery in the same way that a traditional VDI environment is, it doesn't really matter whether they're using a corporate device or whether they're using one of their own machines. It provides a secure session and separates that environment from the device that's connecting in. So whilst you wouldn't want this, in theory you could have a virus-riddled machine connecting in on Windows Virtual Desktop and still have confidence that you're not going to be compromised by that device. Very quickly on this, so I mentioned this earlier on. From a licensing perspective, you don't license Windows Virtual Desktop as a standalone, and those of you that have looked at this already will be aware of that. It comes licensed as part of one of the following, as you can see on the screen, per license bundles. So I think the entry level would be the F3 license, which is about £10 per user per month, but probably the most common is going to be either M365 Business Premium or an M365 E3 license, which is anywhere between £15 and £30 per user per month. So you kind of do away with this idea of user CALs and VMware or Citrix-based subscription licensing. It's bundled into the platform costs, which makes it quite simple to build a cost profile around. Yes, there are some variable costs when it comes to Azure consumption, but that can be controlled in the form of kind of scale up, scale down capabilities, which Toby will talk a little bit about later on.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So we're going to jump into the demo. I've got a few different scenarios prepared for you guys to take a look at. The initial one's called High Powered Desktop Experience. Now, this is a 3D graphics enabled CAD/CAM machine, and I just wanted to show that it's possible to almost replace these expensive desktop devices with a cloud-based CAD/CAM service. As well as that, it also demonstrates how you can more generally replace a desktop. So it doesn't have to be a task-based user VDI as we've seen in the past with a lot of VDI implementations. This is a full desktop replacement if that's what you require. We're then going to look at some of the cool new technology that's coming down the track. So App Attach is a roadmap technology which is in preview currently. This is not just applicable to Windows Virtual Desktop, this is applicable to a Windows estate in general, but this shows how you can move towards a more stateless model for the deployment of your desktop. So applications can be attached and detached dynamically based on the user who's accessing the environment. So we don't have to have a steady state of installed applications. And I'll demo that. We're then going to take a little look at the droplet computing solution for containerizing legacy applications. And then we're going to take a brief look at some of the management and monitoring functionality that our partners at Nerdio offer. The management and monitoring of the WVD platform is lacking from a native perspective. However, there are tools available which we use as part of our managed service, which can provide application insights, performance metrics on the environment, and allow you to do elements of automation, so start up and shut down hosts, for example, which will lead to a significant cost saving compared to a steady state environment. Okay, so I'll just drop out of the presentation briefly and show you what that looks like. So you can access a Windows Virtual Desktop environment in two ways, either via the native remote desktop client, which I've got installed on my machine. You can see I've got a number of desktops available within that, or via a web browser using the web client. Both work very well. The web browser, as you'd imagine, is perhaps a slightly compromised experience compared to the full client version, but audio still works and functionality is still as you'd expect it to be. So on par with for example, the Horizon suite. So initially, I'm going to jump into our 3D demo machine, which I should have a session active on at the moment. It's just using RDP as the connection protocol. And you can see this is a shared session host, but you can see the experience that you have is of Windows 10. This doesn't look like a Server 2012 environment that you'd expect from most remote desktop services. This is a full Windows 10 experience for your users. And this machine, as I mentioned, is fairly highly spec'd. So we are running a Tesla GPU, so an NVIDIA GPU in this environment, just to give a demo of what 3D CAD/CAM might look like on a virtual desktop. I've also used this desktop, and he won't thank me for showing you, but this is my colleague Elliot, this picture of me for a team session.
You could have picked a better picture of him.
Well, I took quite a few snips actually, and that was the best one of the list.
Wow. Okay.
Sure. I have asked for his permission to use that, and he's accepted, so we're okay. But yeah, Teams works without issue, which is very important from a kind of modern workspace perspective. So we've got Revit installed on this machine. We've got it launched already, but you can see that we've got some sample files, and if I load a fairly chunky sample architecture file into the machine, I'll launch one of the 3D scenarios, and as you can see, this is a 3D rendering of an architectural diagram, like a house. But you can see performance in terms of movement is absolutely as you'd expect it to be. You can use this environment. It may become evident I'm not an expert in this product, but I can show you that the experience is as a user would want it to be. So it's as responsive as a user would need it to be. And again, it jumps between scenes quite happily. The movement's exactly as you'd want.
Quick question, Toby.
Yeah.
Can you run this from a Chromebook?
Yes, you can. You can run the web browser based version, and the experience will be almost identical. In terms of the client, I'd need to check if the client's available for the Chromebook, but I'm pretty sure if it supports the Google Store, then you will be able to use the Google Store version of the RDP client. So need to confirm that, but I'm pretty certain that's the case.
Thank you.
So from a 3D perspective, you can see that this is an entirely usable experience, and would allow users to edit and model 3D items within their environment. I've also got Minecraft installed on this, which I was testing out earlier on, but yeah, I won't bore you with that one at the moment. So I'll just drop out of that session. And next on the list, if I can remind myself, was app attach delivery. So I have another machine configured which can demonstrate how app attach works. So app attach is a really interesting technology. It's, I think, available in the spring release of Windows 10, although I'll need to confirm that. This is a preview version of the OS that we're running currently, which has the required binaries to allow you to attach and detach applications. Now, how this works is very similar to something like AppV historically, in that you sequence or package an app locally on a packaging machine. You associate a certificate with that application, and then it becomes virtualized, and you can attach and detach it from other operating systems that have the capability to present those applications. And in practice, how it works is it requires, at this point, a small script to be run. That could be done as a log on and log off script. I'm sure in the near future that will be added to a group policy or in-tune function. And you can see at the moment, this machine, I've virtualized an application called FileZilla, which some of you might be aware of. Which is just a FTP application. You can see it's not installed locally on this machine. If I search for it, all I get is web results. However, if I run the registration script, which was very quick, and I'll see if I look for FileZilla on my local machine, I have the application and it launches as if it was locally installed. And the reason it launches because as if it was locally installed is because it is locally installed. These applications install in the same way as Windows Store applications. So if I return for all the Apex packages, all the Windows Store-based applications that exist on this environment, you'll see there's millions of them, things like Xbox Gaming Overlay and Microsoft Language Experience Pack, all the stuff that gets installed by default into a new Windows 10 installation. You can see that I've also got my FileZilla install. With a certificate published by ourselves, so that proves that it's a secure application that we've approved for deployment in our environment. It's totally usable as a local application. You can see I have full access to all of my local files and folders. However, when I log off this machine, and if I simulate that, you'll see the deregistration happens. The application closes and it's no longer present on this machine. Now, this is a great technology for a session host or a Windows virtual desktop environment because it helps this environment to be non-persistent in that no user settings need to persist on a session host after log off. We're also using in this environment FSLogix, which was an acquisition by Microsoft at the back end of last year, which is a profile management, profile management software, which allows you to capture user profiles and add them and remove them to a desktop session dynamically. So the way that would work is that as I log on to this environment, my profile and everything that makes the desktop mine is streamed into the environment. So my desktop shortcuts and my favorites for Internet Explorer or Chrome, for example. And when I log off, all of those bespoke settings are stripped off from the environment. So it goes back to being a base state desktop. And the same is true now of applications. We can do that via app attach. The applications that are assigned to me via group membership, for example, are dynamically installed when I log on and dynamically uninstalled as I log off to leave a much cleaner session host, which requires less management. And that means things like applications can be managed out of band. So if I need to update FileZilla, for example, I don't need to rebuild my desktop estate. I can repackage it and then simply change the script or change the package that gets deployed to users when they log on and log off, which saves a lot of administration time in the back end. Lizzie, any more questions coming at that point, or shall I carry on?
Carry on, there's no more questions.
Okay, no problem. So we're now going to take a little look at legacy application delivery. So AppAttach is a great new technology for delivering modern applications, but there are plenty of use cases out there where users have, or customers have, large estates of unsupported applications, which
you don't have to admit it on this call if you do.
Yeah, hands up, everybody. Yeah, no, it's most organizations will have line of business applications which haven't been updated for a long time, or the developer left, and it's a critical business application, but you're left with a legacy that you just have to manage. So we partner with a business called Droplet Computing, who provide a very novel approach to this. They provide the opportunity to containerize these applications within a secure application container. And what that means is that we have a Windows 10 desktop, as I mentioned previously, with a Droplet container installed on it and Access 97 installed within the container. If I just launch that, I'll put it in full screen so everybody can see. I think most people would probably say that Access 97 is no longer supported. I think we'd all be in agreement on that. However, we can run it securely on a Windows 10 environment without risking any of the security holes that might exist within this application. All of the fact that it's not been patched for the best part 20 years. We're running within a secure container, and we are in control of what gets into and goes out of this container, because there are firewalls, or there is a firewall rather built into this secure container. But you can see usability for this is exactly as you would want it to be. It works exactly as a locally installed application. The banner, so the surround for the frame rather for the environment is optional. Droplets found that it's quite beneficial to give users the impression that they're working in something outside of their current desktop, because it reminds everybody that this is a secure environment, but that we can deliver applications without the frame that just look like they're natively running as well, if that's a concern. And yeah, as I mentioned, transfer in and out of the container is managed via a firewall and via permissions in the application itself, in the container itself rather. At the moment, we have a single synchronized file share in and out of this container, but you can add network drives to the environment. You can add printers. You can make it feel like a Windows environment if you're comfortable with that. But your security team obviously need to be comfortable with that as well.
And just because it's running in a container, Toby, you can print, you can save, you can do all the things that you'd expect to do with these applications, because it does have the ability to talk to the desktop itself.
Absolutely, yeah. So we've by default it has a file share that's synchronized. So if I export a selection of information from this environment, that will be available in the local desktop. And similarly, I can copy data from the local desktop into this container, but we're in control of how that happens. This is no longer a locally installed Windows application, which has all of the security holes associated with it. The only egress and ingress of data is via the channels that we permit, and if we need to, we can layer a firewall over that. And we can even do port translation if required. So manage which ports are allowed and manage how they translate within the application. So the core use case here is, or the core offering is really to secure those legacy applications that your security managers are saying we need to get rid of, but that the business says they can't live without. I'll also mention, whilst we are, I've just put myself in full screen. Whilst we're in this environment, I did mention FS Logics and profile management. Just whilst we're here, I'll show that persistence is important. You can see that I've got my my corporate OneDrive here, and I've got all of my files and folders. I've got my got my son's fossil homework, which we did, which will load. Wow, okay, I seem to have lots of windows open there. That's the problem with Edge, is it opens everything that you've had previously. But that opened reasonably happily after Edge finished its little panic attack. These, some of you guys may have this in place already, but these files and folders are not locally downloaded to this desktop. That would be a nightmare for a session host environment, because everybody's got gigs and gigs of data, and every time they log on, it'd have to synchronize. We're using a OneDrive group policy, which allows for stub data. So all of these are essentially shortcuts to items in OneDrive, which get downloaded dynamically as you launch them. But for all intents and purposes, and from a user experience perspective, it feels like these files are local for them, and it's the OneDrive experience that a customer would, rather a user would want to have within the environment. And it's the manageability experience that an admin would want, because nobody wants to have to manage gigs and gigs of user OneDrive data. And so where are we? How are we doing for time, Mike? Are we okay?
I think we're fine at the moment, mate. Yep.
Great. One more thing I'll mention is, again, anybody that has a Horizon View, Citrix, or remote desktops environment will know that you can serve out both applications and desktops. Just wanted to show that that's possible from this environment as well. And because this is a Windows native service, they can integrate into the start menu as well. So this is a application that our colleagues at our customer at St John's Ambulance use, and they very kindly allowed us to use in this demonstration. This is a bespoke customer created line of business application that we don't connect to the back end. This is just a client, but I believe this has got Access 95 components in it. So this is an unsupported application, which is, yeah, launching natively, or it feels like natively, on my local desktop. It's just a published application, but application publishing as well as desktop publishing is possible through the Windows Virtual Desktop environment. I don't have a log on because I don't have any access to their back end. And similarly with applications like Excel, if you've worked with application publishing in the past, okay, just let me cancel out of that, you will have seen a similar experience to this. But just to show that it works in exactly the same way, this is a session host running in Azure, and this is my local desktop that I'm now running a remote session of Excel on. Usability is, exactly as you'd want it to be. And lastly, then we're going to talk about manageability for the platform. So unfortunately, at this point, this is where the native Windows desktop platform falls down slightly. Manageability is there, and you can manage the environment and monitor the environment, but you have to build and configure those services yourself. So a lot of it must be configured via PowerShell or via Azure Monitor, for example, which is very time consuming. There are some tools out there that can help, as in native Microsoft tools, but it's, it can be quite time consuming and quite tricky to get right. However, there are partners out there who specialize in this area. So Nerdio, for example, who are a company who've been going since 2015, delivering Azure management services, have recently released a manager for WVD, so dedicated to the Windows Virtual Desktop platform. And this gives you all of the manageability that you would need for a remote desktop environment. So it allows you to manage your master images and rebuild your session hosts and even build out dynamic pools to take advantage of cost savings within Azure. And it also includes some elements of monitoring, which I'll get onto in a minute. But if we take a look at this environment quickly, we're running a hybrid environment because Microsoft have recently changed how Windows Virtual Desktop works. There's a legacy version, which is kind of the current version, which is managed via PowerShell, and there's a new version which is managed in the Azure portal. And we have environments in both, so that's why we have this configured in this way. But we're going to focus on the new version. Within this environment, you can see we've got a dynamic host pool called WVD DN for dynamic, and there's a single session host in there. This product allows you to spin up and shut down session hosts just in time for your users. So one of the most challenging aspects of running up anything in Azure, but specifically a remote desktop environment, is that you don't want a steady state environment. You don't want 10 session hosts or 50 session hosts available constantly for your peak users. So let's say your average user base is 50% of your peak user base, but you still need to have capacity for those peak users. What you don't want to be doing is running those services all the time, because then you're paying as you use for far more resources than you actually need. With Nerdio Manager for WVD, we can set up dynamic host pools which will intelligently start up and shut down those hosts as and when your users need them, based on a set of rules that you configure in this environment. So if I go back to the host pool itself and click the Manage Auto Scaling, you can see handily it will give you anticipated costs for your minimum and maximum deployment based on the configuration that you have in this auto scale rule. Which is really useful, and obviously mine's a pretty small environment, because $65 as a maximum I think would be cost effective for most people, but that's just for a single pool at this point. But you can see we can set up what size we want our VMs to look like, how we recognize the pool as being online, and most people stick with the agent being available. What your scaling logic looks like. So I've got mine into test mode currently, which is that I want maximum sessions per host as one, because that way, if I log on to that desktop, I can see the auto scaling process happen. But you may want 5 hosts active and 10 sessions on each, and for it to scale beyond scale on logic beyond that. We can pre-stage host. We can set limits as to when we want scalings to happen. So if you're concerned that you might get a burst of users, and you don't want those users to have to wait for hosts to start up, then we can set limits as to when that scaling will happen. And if you want users to be removed from a host as well, so if you for example have very aggressive working hours and you say, okay, users shouldn't be on this system beyond 5 p.m, then you can shut down the host and give the user a reminder that they need to log off, because you have a specific budget that you need to stick to within your WVD environment. So this is a really powerful tool that isn't available as it stands in the native Windows Virtual Desktop platform. This is only available from via this Nerdio Manager for WVD console. You can achieve it via some scripts and via some logic apps in Azure, but I've done both, and I can promise you this is a much nicer way to approach it. So within this platform, we can also manage things like desktop images. So if we needed to make changes to our desktop image, you can see I've got a default here, we'd spin it up, log on, make our changes, and then seal that image and use and redeploy it to our Windows Virtual Desktop tenants or workspaces. And just to quickly move on to the last element of the demo. Within Nerdio for WVD, there's a monitoring section. Now this is provided by another partner called Sepago. However, it's all billed as a single per user cost. And what that does is provide really in-depth metrics for your Windows Virtual Desktop environment. So as you can see, we're looking, I've not had many users on this environment, it's just been me, but it'll still show the metrics for these purposes. So you can see, for example, what sessions have been active, average latency per session. So this is really useful. So if a user phones up and talks about poor performance, we can instantly say, okay, well, it looks like your latency is up at 5,000 milliseconds. Are you downloading, or have you got people playing Xbox or whatever in your house? Do you have the bandwidth available? And we can really quickly look into those metrics on a per user basis. So as well as the sessions, we can look at the health of the overall session hosts. You can see that because I'm using a reasonably low powered session host here, you can see there's an infringement against the default SLA, that we don't have enough memory free on the host. But really useful to go in and see the health of our hosts, where sessions are distributed on the hosts, loads of additional information about how well these individual hosts are performing. Processors that we have running on the host, so top processes, for example, average CPU for a process per host, and how those processes affect the user experience. And a really useful one here, applications and users. So what applications your users are using and how that's impacting the performance on this environment. So you can see, for example, that, just move that down quickly. You can see, for example, that I have SDX helper using a significant proportion of my available CPU consumption. Okay, so why is it doing that? That doesn't sound right. If I go and did a quick Google for why is SDX helper causing me that problem? Okay, well this person seems to have had that issue, and it seems that it's an issue with my Microsoft Office install. So I need to go and sort out my Microsoft Office install. But you can really quickly drill into those issues. We can see here that Microsoft Edge is using up a huge amount, and that's probably because if you remember back to the demo a second ago where I had
about 1,000 windows open.
So that was that was my stress test that I had in place on some of my hosts to kind of force this to move up the stack, so I could see, okay, Microsoft Edge is using a huge amount of my resources. That's something I need to look into, or maybe I need to increase the resources available on my host.
A quick question. Is this information available within Azure, a bit harder to get to?
Absolutely, yeah. So this information is being pulled out via custom queries on a log analytics store. These queries are all created by Sepago, who are the organisation who have built this management and monitoring dashboard. But yeah, the information's all there as long as you're recording it into your log analytics workspace. But I think the additional cost of Sepago for monitoring is something like 50p a user a month. So it's a very low cost solution rather than having to build your own dashboards. But if that's something that you're good at and have the time for, then yeah, it's absolutely achievable.
Thanks, Toby.
No problem. So that concludes the demo elements, unless there's any more questions or anything anyone wants to see, and we can happily revisit that on a one-to-one basis if there are bits that people would like to see in more depth. I'll just resume from the current slide. And next up, we're going to talk about migration considerations. So if you're currently using an on-premise remote desktop solution or standard desktops and laptops in your environment, there are a couple of considerations if you plan on moving across to this. So firstly, you require domain services. So the only way this works currently is with domain services either in an on-premise domain or with Active Directory domain services in Azure. most people, I would imagine, are in a position where they've got an on-premise domain and may already have an Azure Active Directory and an Azure subscription, or maybe just be starting on that journey. So as long as you have an on-premise Active Directory and an Azure tenant with an Azure Active Directory that we can synchronize to, then those are required, and that'll get you what you need. The machines can be standard domain joined or hybrid AD joined. Again, we don't really need to get into the details of that at the moment, but the key point there is that they can't be joined to Azure AD. These machines need to be joined to an Active Directory. There is potential to convert and import existing master images from Hyper-V and VMware if you're using an on-premise RDS environment or an on-premise Horizon View or Citrix environment. As long as you have the virtual hard drives, the VHDs or VHDXs, we can convert those, migrate them to Azure and convert them into a Windows Virtual Desktop platform. So if you've got an on-premise Server 2008 R2 RDS farm that absolutely has to work in the same way it does currently, that can be migrated to Azure if you have an image for it and serviced out of Windows Virtual Desktop. Same's true of Windows 7 master images as well. Windows 7 is an option for desktops, but only dedicated desktops. The only way to get a multi-user desktop experience is with Windows 10. Windows 7 will only give you a dedicated one-to-one desktop. Yeah, as I mentioned, session hosts, multi-user session hosts can be Windows 10 or Server 2012 onwards. Ideally, the environment should be built in an Azure region that's close to your users, just to reduce latency. So, I mean, it's fairly common sense, but don't build your desktop environment in Australia if your users are in London, because you're just making a rod for your own back there, because your latency will be 300 or 400 milliseconds. And ideally, you should plan for those backend services and applications to be in the same region. So there's no issue with a Windows Virtual Desktop accessing on-premise applications as long as the connectivity is in place. But it's, you will be adding a bit of latency there, so that generally won't be a problem. But as a future goal, it would be beneficial to move those back-end services to the same Azure region as your desktops, so that you have local speed connectivity to those applications. But there's no problem working in hybrid modes initially. And a couple of limitations. Conscious I've been talking for a long time, so apologies. I have to give Mike a go in a minute. He doesn't like being silent for a long time. So currently, Intune management is available for dedicated desktops only, not session hosts. Intune, if you guys are using it, is a great technology for managing your desktop and laptop estate. There is roadmap for it to apply to the session hosts, but at the moment I think it's just causing Microsoft some challenges, because Intune tends to be a per user based deployment. I think managing a multi-user environment is causing Microsoft some challenges, but it will happen soon. Some elements are still in public preview. So, for example, we haven't really looked at those, but the management console within Azure for the Windows Virtual Desktop platform is public preview. So the supported platform is still via the PowerShell-based management module. As we've already mentioned, the native management tools are lacking in our opinion compared to Citrix and VMware. It's a new product, and they've focused on the user experience rather than manageability at this point. Manageability is coming, but we have a solution for that via Nerdio and Topago, if that's something you're interested in at this point. Knowledge of the Microsoft Azure platform is required. I mean, it's an Azure product, so ability to use Azure is obviously going to, or to understand the principles of Azure is obviously going to be a benefit. And And yeah, be aware this is a pay-as-you-use service. Automation will pay for itself, and that's our strong opinion that implementing something like Nerdio to start up and shut down these hosts will pay for itself, because the cost of these machines, the cost of running an Azure machine is not cheap. And yeah, the last thing you want to be doing is running a lot of unrequired Azure resources and therefore paying for them. So
it works out to be more cost effective with the right sort of automation, whilst you might want to combine both, than say implementing reserved instances across this estate, based upon some of the number crunching that we've done, doesn't it, Toby?
Yeah, absolutely. So reserved instances can save you 30 to 40%, but if you're being smart about the delivery of these desktops, you might only have them on for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and then leave a kind of skeleton service up for the evening, which will make a huge impact compared to running 24 hours a day.
Another quick question. Do you know if this is seen as a replacement for remote desktop services?
It really depends on your business strategy. So it's not really a replacement. Remote desktop services is still a supported service, and will still be available in current and future versions of Windows Server, to my knowledge. So if an organization wants to continue running remote desktop services on premise, I don't think that's going to cause an issue. However, I don't think
there's any noise from Microsoft at the moment they're going to demise that service.
No, not that I've seen. Not that I've seen. However, running it this way gets you away from needing to have that broker gateway architecture on premise.
You can see that it could act. If you fast forward 2-3 years. You could see that Microsoft's strategy around Azure consumption and per user OPEX based pricing would lead to a demise in those types of services. But of course, it'll be around for a long time, I suspect.
Thanks,
appreciate we're slightly pushed for time, so we'll move quickly through this piece. So this is just an overview based on the previous slide of how a foundation IT-based service would manage this platform on your behalf on the left-hand side. So the orchestration platform obviously lives with Microsoft, as we've already discussed. Within your client Azure subscription, which would remain yours, we wouldn't host the desktops within our environment. However, we would implement our management platform over the top of this environment if you required management for the platform. So that's just an example of the elements that we would manage on your behalf within your subscription. So roadmap features we've already mentioned: full Intune integration, portal-based management, which is in preview currently, and anyone that has an Azure subscription can go and just type Windows Virtual Desktop into the marketplace, and you'll be able to look at that. Some elements of host automation are in preview. They are limited, I believe, compared to, for example, what Nerdio offers, but they are there. Azure storage account-based file shares. This is a really good one. We haven't really spoken about this, but Azure storage accounts are really useful buckets for putting data into. Microsoft have now implemented a solution whereby you can layer access control, so ACLs, over the top of those file shares, making them pretty much a replacement for an on-premise or cloud-based file server. You can layer all of the permissioning that you would normally do on a file server over the top of a storage account file share, which if you're running an Azure file server, this is going to be a significantly cheaper option for you. It's preview currently. We have it available, and we're using it. In fact, that's where our FS Logic profiles are being stored. So if that's something you guys are interested in, feel free to reach out, and we can look at that in more depth. And app attach, as we've already discussed, is in preview. Benefits from an ecosystem partner perspective, we've covered most of these, but full estate management and automation is available now via Fit and Nerdio Manager for WVD. In-depth Azure-based monitoring is also available. I missed Sepago off that list, but as a partnership between all three of those entities. Secure legacy app containerization by droplet computing, and thin clients.
Easy for you to say, so.
I'm sorry, I've been talking for a long time. Thin client, I was going to say thin apps, but that's something completely different. Thin clients and client repurposing is available via our partner iGel Technology. If you are looking for a non-Windows thin client solution.
Cool.
Thank you very much for your time on that, guys. Mike,
we've got a handful of minutes, and I appreciate that most people have got lots of other Teams calls to join, which we all seem to spend our lives in at the moment. But opening up the floor, I guess, to questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to come off mute if you'd like to, or put in the chat function, and Lizzie can do the honours. If there's anything that we've not covered, any outstanding questions, anything that we said that didn't quite make sense, feel free to ask. Wow, amazing. So I will ensure that there is a copy of this session available to you guys that joined. There's a few people that wanted to join but couldn't as well. I'll make sure you got a copy of that. You should have, or Toby will, Lizzie will distribute Toby and my contact details should there be any specific questions that you want to ask relating to your own environments, or if you want to do a deeper dive into certain areas, because it is a big technology, and as we sort of saw in the forefront of this, the use cases can be broad, and you can merge some of those use cases kind of together. So more than happy to take conversations offline if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. We can deep dive into any elements of this, and yeah, apologies if some of it has been a bit whistle stop, but there's quite a lot to get in. Just
looking at you. Sorry, Lizzie, go on.
I was just going to say about the question, can an existing Microsoft 365 license be used, or does a new one need to be purchased for each user?
So yeah, you can use your existing Microsoft 365 license, providing it's either business premium as a minimum. Depending on how you purchase your licenses as well, if you're, say, on an Office 365 E3, you can upgrade licenses to either an M365 E3 or M365 Business Premium, which isn't too dissimilar from an E3 license. There are some sort of security and compliance controls you don't get with that, but they're more or less similarly priced. So yes, if you're already a Microsoft 365 E3 customer and you've got 200 users using it, you're already licensed for Windows Virtual Desktop. So yes, there's some cost involved in implementing the solution and planning it out, and then there'll be Azure consumption costs. But there's no additional uplift costs if you're already Microsoft 365 customers licensed to a minimum of business premium.
Thanks.
So if you've got Microsoft 365 E3 at the moment, you're already licensed for Windows Virtual Desktop. There wouldn't be a need to buy new licenses or relicensed. It's already a service that's available to you. Yeah. Thanks, John.